Braid number 2 is from something called a Lucet. Now this is a Lucet. Again, it's quite an ancient tool. However, there is very little in the way of historical evidence that Lucets existed in this form. It's an assumption. We do know braids from this type of Lucet existed, but we don't specifically know that this existed in this form, even though we have discovered these types of tools for centuries. So it probably existed in this kind of form. It's basically a two-pronged fork, and a lot of Lucets have a hole there that you pull the braid through. And it's very, very simple, and you just simply cross that over, pull a thread, pull it down, turn it to the left, and do the same again. And you continue to do that. You turn it to the left, put it back across. Now this was done to produce cording, usually to hold up clothing, or to hold maybe something like a knife, or I'm using quite fine fabric. They could use leather. You could cord pretty much with anything, and it would produce this type of cord. It's quite difficult to see because it's actually quite fine. So that is Lucet cording. It also made them quite, it was quite springy. Even though this is cotton, this is quite a springy cord. And that again was useful for clothing because it didn't restrict and it didn't break as easily. It is immensely strong, considering it's made with the finest cord that you could snap in a second. The minute it goes into the cording, it becomes immensely strong. That is Lucet work. You do see it in a lot of reenactments. And again, as I say, there's proof this type of braiding existed, probably back to Saxon and possibly even earlier times. But we can't prove that they looked exactly like this, because the actual Lucet has never been found. But the kind of braiding it produces has. So, like a lot of reenactment, like a lot of historical find, half of it is guesswork, and I'm afraid that's as good as it gets, unless at some point the tool itself is found, because they were probably wood, possibly bone. They would often just rot away or be broken up. And while we're talking about reenactment and types of braiding, we come to a tollen wheel. Now this works very much the same as the kumihimo wheel. You would put your fabric or your leather through there, it would go through the hole, and you would do it very much the same in that you would constantly move them across. You see tollen wheels a lot in reenactment. However, there is absolutely no evidence that these things were ever used or ever existed up until fairly recently, within the last couple of centuries. There's a lot of speculation, again, that this was in effect the European version of the Japanese kumihimo. The Japanese kumihimo, we know, was in use in Japan from about the 7th century AD, because we have documented cases of it being used. We have historical evidence of them being used, paintings, drawings. The Japanese tended to write about things, they tended to paint things, so we know that they existed. This, I think the assumption is that this similar sort of thing that is called the tollen wheel existed in Europe, but we don't have any proof at all. We have some proof that this existed, and it's if nothing else, it really is quite a fun craft because it's very simple and it doesn't take up much space, and you can make some really lovely braids, whether you're making them for clothing or even making beautiful braids to put in people's hair. It's a very easy and simple way of doing it. So that is the Lucet.